As a kid, I used to judge my mum so harshly for wearing a dressing gown. I thought it was the most embarrassing thing you could ever do. Yeah, right now, it's 5:30 in the morning. According to my car, it is 6 degrees outside. Judge away. I could not care less, because if I'm going to record this video, there is no way I'm getting out of this thing. It is way too cold. Okay, so let's get started. What is today's video? Well, last Saturday, I was out with girls for dinner, and one of my friends asked me about this situation right here. Then on Tuesday, I got an email from Bryony, one of our favourite local agents, and she asked me about this situation right here. Twice in 4 days, what does that tell me? That tells me it is FAQ Friday time. So what is this situation here? Well, in this scenario, person one's house sits on or just over the property boundary within property number 2. And when I say just over, I mean the eaves or the window hoods are typically on or just over the boundary, ever so slightly. So the question naturally comes, can P2 force P1 to resolve or remove that encroachment? And if so, what are the options? Well, the short answer is yes. P2 can force P1, oh, that sounds a bit weird. P2 can force P1 to resolve or remove the encroachment, and you have 4 options. And in today's video, we're going to talk through what those 4 options are. So if that sounds like it's something that interests you, then stick around. Okay, so before we dive into those 4 different options, there's 2 questions or 2 topics that I just want to cover off quickly. Firstly, where? Where do you find these situations? Short answer, everywhere. So my friend's job, or the job that my friend spoke to me about on the weekend, was in Willowin. I can't quite remember where Bryony's site was, but she likes to hang out in Toowong. So let's just say Toowong, being her hood, is where this one was. We're currently preparing a job at the moment for a site at Kedron. Earlier this year, we had a site at Sandgate that had this issue. I've heard rumours of a street at Sandgate where the entire street, every single house, is just a little bit in the neighbour's property and a little bit in the neighbour's property. It's ridiculous. Like I said, the entire street. So these things can be found all over the city. Yes, more often than not, they are in the older areas, so those pre-1946 areas, or 47 areas, I should say. However, they are not always exclusively in those old areas. I had an inquiry probably about a year ago from a lady who had a property out at 17 Mile Rocks. In that situation, she'd found out that her retaining wall and her fence were just inside the neighbour's property, and the neighbour was asking them to remove or resolve the encroachment. So as I said, it's not exclusively the older areas. This stuff can come up in the newer areas, but more often than not, it is those older inner city, smaller lots that we tend to see the stuff on. Why? Let's be honest. Technology has come a long way over time. Back prior to 1947, we didn't have the technology that we do have today. More importantly though, the enforcement wasn't there back in that sort of time. So these days, council is very big on making us stick to the setback rules and requirements. So often, if setbacks are really tight, you will need to obtain a set-out certificate or a surveyor's setback certificate to confirm what the actual setbacks are. Believe it or not, I have literally lodged a job retrospectively for a job that turned out to be 5 millimetres short of what it needed to be. So the council requirements or the council conditions said they needed 1.5 clearance between the boundary and the wall. When it actually got completed, or when it was finished, they got the surveyor out, the surveyor measured it and went, yeah, you're 5 millimetres short. I can't provide you with that certificate that you need. Without that certificate, the certifier couldn't sign off that the conditions had been met. Without the certifier's sign off, they didn't have the final, didn't have the building approval. It was all illegal. So yes, we had to go back through council. Back then, back prior to 1947, people didn't care. They're a little bit more lax. Now that doesn't justify every situation or doesn't explain every situation, but they're probably the 2 reasons that would explain it more often than not. Number 1, technology failure, and number 2, lack of interest, care factor, whatever you want to call it. Okay, so now that we've got those 2 questions out of the way, let's dive into what the actual options are. Now the first option is probably the most obvious option that everyone comes up with. Let's just go through and demolish the encroaching portion. So let's call that demo. Now, yes, if you can physically demolish the eaves or the window hoods or whatever's sitting across the boundary without compromising the integrity of the structure as a whole, maybe that's an option. Except if those eaves or that window hood or whatever's encroaching across the boundary is protected. So if you're in traditional building character overlay and the house was built, or the eaves or the window hoods, whatever the encroaching portion is, was built prior to 1947, they're protected. Council likes those things. Those things are very cute. They're very character-like. That's a poor choice of words. They help to enhance the character of the street. Council ain't going to like approving demolition of those things. So I won't say the council will never approve them, but council will oppose it very, very strongly. They don't want these weird one-sided houses popping up in the streets. It's just not a good outcome. So yes, technically that is one option to consider, but if the components you're proposing to remove are protected, the chance of actually getting sign-off or approval from council for that option are very, very slim. Very, very slim. Okay, option number 2, what are we going to do? Let's do slide. So in this option, you essentially pick the house up and slide it across to get the existing house within the property boundaries where it should be. Again, sounds nice and easy, sounds good in theory. What's a relocation cost? Maybe 20 grand. So yes, it's a bit of money, but it's not too crazy. Problem is, more often than not, if you're over that boundary, it means you're really tight on this boundary. It means you don't have the room to be able to move sideways. So like I said, more often than not, this isn't an option because you don't have the space on this boundary to be able to go sideways. Now, option number 3, let's go. This is probably one of the most common ones, easement. So people naturally then say, okay, what if I put an easement over the portion? Let me see if I can draw this. So an easement like that essentially covers the encroaching portion of the building, which essentially legitimizes it and allows it to stay in place. Think of it from this person's perspective. That easement is a constraint on their property. When they go to sell their property in the future, it's going to essentially devalue it in some people's eyes. So they naturally are going to want some compensation for that easement or creating that easement. So number 1, you've got the cost of actually getting the solicitor and the surveyor or whoever's required to prepare the easement documents and to register all of that information. But then you've also got to pay these guys some moolah to make them happy to accept that easement. You're kind of at their discretion, at their power. It could be a small amount, it could be a big amount. So unfortunately, more often that from a practical perspective, yes, great solution. From a monetary perspective, unfortunately, it can often become very, very expensive. Now, option number 4, ROL, reconfiguration of a lot. Essentially what we do in this option is pick the property boundary up and push it over. Again, that only works if there is clear space down the side boundary here. If you've got, say, this house comes down here and comes out like that, you can't obviously pick the boundary up and move it sideways. So you have to look at stepping the boundary. It gets all sorts of messy. Again, yes, from a practical perspective, it works. From a cost perspective, totally different story. So you've got the town planning fees associated with picking that boundary up and moving across, reconfiguring a lot. You might be looking at maybe 5 grand by the time you pay for a private town planner and private town planner and the council fees. Then you've got to pay maybe 5 grand for a surveyor to do their thing. Then you've got to pay for the it's 5:30 in the morning. Come on, give me a break. Then you need to pay for a surveyor to do the plan sealing application if you go through a surveyor. You've got the plan sealing fees, you've got the titles office fees, it starts to add up. Then the kicker, you need to pay things like stamp duty because you're paying to buy that land off the neighbour. You need to pay the neighbour some moolah. Again, they might be reasonable. They might sit there and go, yeah, okay, well, I'll only charge you market value. They could get a little bit greedy and they could be like, today is payday. And they could charge you a fortune. So again, from a practical perspective, yes, it works. From a cost perspective, maybe not. So there you go. The final thing I want to cover off here is a different sort of situation. We've had this come up twice this year already. It is ridiculous. What do you do if P1 is a corner allotment? So if P1 sits over into the council road reserve. Well, in that situation, you actually have a 5th option. You can approach council's land use coordinator and essentially ask them to provide a letter which confirms that they won't be taking any enforcement action for that historical encroachment. That then allows you to stay in place. A couple of different things. Number 1, you need to prove that it is actually historical in nature. So the encroaching portion was created prior to 1947. It's not a more recent sort of thing. Then you also need to show that any works you're doing on the site, I have to think about this for a second, any works that you're doing on the site are not going to further enhance that or increase that encroachment. You're not going to make it any bigger or any worse. The two jobs that we've looked at, so one was at Sandgate and one was at Kedron recently, both of those situations we've been able to get that letter quite easily, so it wasn't too painful. Unlike these sort of situations here where you're dealing with a neighbour, that's where it becomes problematic. Now, actually there is one more thing that I do want to cover off. If you're P2, come on, don't be greedy, be reasonable here. There is a little thing called karma. What goes around comes around. So yes, like my friend, on the weekend, my friend was actually P2 and she was sitting there going, I'm gonna make it rain. And I was like, yeah, what goes around comes around, girl. It is gonna bite you at some stage in the future. So don't be mean, don't be rude, be nice. Play nice, people, come on. Okay, I think that covers everything I want to talk about today. As always, as you guys know, I love likes, comments and shares. It makes me feel all loved. So please like, comment and share. Actually, one more thing I wanted to cover off. Julie, the work boots you bought me 4 years ago, they're still living on. Thanks for watching, guys.
For all you red tape lovers out there, I have one thing to say. Well, no, actually, I've got three. Number one, the advice provided in these videos is general in nature. It's not site-specific. You would be a silly Billy to go and make financial decisions based on this advice without first checking with the town planner. Don't be a silly Billy. Number two, Brisbane town planning is in no way linked to Brisbane City Council. The views expressed in these videos are my own, not council's. So if you don't like them, blame me, not council. Number three, what was my number three? Oh yeah, the views expressed in these videos are accurate at the time of recording. If you're watching this video back 10 years from now, the views may not be so accurate. That's all.